Oh yeah, okay.
All
That's
right, here
probably
we
fun.
go. Go ahead, Nick.
Awesome. Welcome to East Meets West. It's the show where Rob and I discuss contemporary Canadiana from our adopted homes in Calgary and Ottawa. And this is a very special edition of East Meets West. It is the North Meets South edition.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, featuring our very special guest, Matt Staroste.
Yes.
Staroste.
Question
Staroste.
question
Staroste.
mark?
That's a
Uh,
good
I'm not
question.
actually sure that I've ever said your last name out loud.
my name's actually Tom. I'm Tom.
Okay. Because I also remember the first time I asked you, it was like, last name? Looked at me and said, last
Okay.
name. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. Is there like a special accent? Last name?
Last name.
Yeah,
That's
You're
all
still in
last
my
name.
phone as Matt Last name.
mm. With an ague on the E. I like it.
No, I didn't get that fancy.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what's
Well,
happening
thank you
today,
very much
Nick?
for having
Yeah.
me. I'm happy to be here.
We're very glad that you're here. So we are now 48 hours from the polls being closed
Yeah.
It's
in
very
the
exciting.
longest Canadian election in modern history. You have to go back
Hmm.
to 1872 to get to an equivalent length.
No one's
And
gonna
they
do
didn't
that.
No.
they didn't have fancy things like widespread use of the internal combustion engine or telephony or any of these other modern marvels.
Twitter.
Yeah, anything that was a Twitter was actual birds.
Yeah,
It was
literally.
it was a dark time, literally because
Cube.
electricity wasn't widespread either. So
Oh man.
Anyway, go on, go on.
This
I'm
is gonna
liking,
be a
I'm
fun
liking where
one.
this
I
is
can
going.
tell. Matt is joining us internationally right now. And so if there are connection issues, we all apologize. But we wanted to have him because he's very knowledgeable about the Canadian political scene, and we thought he could lend his voice to the show.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm happy. I hope to not fail you, but I'll probably fail you.
Okay.
I don't think that's possible.
Oh,
You know
you're so
what?
kind.
Just on the note of an international audience, what is the press coverage of Canada's election like in Australia?
Ah, that's super interesting, actually. I just bought a copy of a financial paper called the Australian Financial Review, and on the cover, or sorry, in the hamper on the cover, it was mentioned. And in fact, I opened it up to the designated page, and there was a two-page spread
Hmm.
kind of going over
My.
it. Mm. Now, this paper actually gets purchased, and people read it. So
Whoa.
You don't
that's
say.
that's something. I think that says something. There's a very popular prime minister here by the name of John Howard, a couple prime ministers ago.
Yeah.
And they've done a lot of comparisons to Stephen Harper and John Howard because Harper modeled a lot of his policies off of kind of John Howard's ideology at the time. Um, and they're kind of saying that he's facing a similar moment now where uh, Harper has been in power for 10 years and there's a lot of kind of fatigue with the prime ministership, and people would just kind of have this interest in replacing him, regardless of whether or not they believe he's done a good or bad job.
Right.
Uh, so,
That's interesting.
yeah, it's been
And
a long time.
I think your use of the word fatigue is interesting too, because it's,
Uh, yeah,
I
I
mean,
think it's
is it,
quite. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, is it fatigue really? Because, I mean, it seems like the same thing that happened to the liberals. Like, just eventually so many things had piled up that they just said, no, no, we got to turf this guy. It's time.
Yeah, I mean, the Globe and Mail just recently published their endorsement, as they do every electoral cycle, and
Which
they,
was
in fact,
interesting.
yeah, and they in fact endorsed the Conservatives again, as long as Stephen Harper doesn't lead it,
Yeah.
which is it's kind of bizarre. It's I don't think I've ever read anything like that ever.
That was really
Uh,
bizarre.
it was really bizarre, and they've been pretty consistent in endorsing conservatives. So the fact that they endorsed them doesn't surprise me, but the fact that even them, even they have kind of thrown Harper under the bus is a pretty big signal to the electorate and to the readership, that his people are just tired of his face, they're tired of his voice, they're tired of
That Lego man hairstyle.
yeah, and I mean, you can talk about the myriad of issues I think that people are frustrated with, but he seems, generally speaking, he seems to be out of touch, at least a lot more out of touch than when he started.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's a fair assessment.
Do we want to start at the hair discussion?
I think we should.
Yeah. Did
It's
did everyone
certainly,
see that Liberal ad comparing hair or talking about Justin Trudeau's hair and saying no matter what kind of hair he has, he's still a good leader?
I have not seen this ad.
I haven't seen this ad either. I'm intrigued.
That sounds spectacular.
It's pretty good. It's a cartoon, and they give him a bunch of different hairstyles, and he talking about his leadership, and then they end up giving him like long, flowing, almost like to his feet length hair, and there's a fan blowing on him, and then saying like that's basically the only thing that could be too far. Other than that, don't worry about his hair, worry about his politics.
Right. Yeah.
That's
I, yeah.
solid messaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can just see the Photoshop potential there to just Photoshop different hairstyles onto him during like press conferences and things.
Yeah.
Personally, I would find that very distracting. I don't know. He could be talking about, selling all of our water in one big lump sum to China, and I would probably agree with him if he was, sporting like a Super Saiyan style, you know, power
What
level
is
over 9,000 wig. That would be great.
what is funny is when I was actually working in the Liberal campaign office here in Calgary Center, there were days when I would wear my hair down, and it would be nice, it would be curly, whatever.
Mm.
And right around the time that they were running that attack ad, people would walk in the front door and look at me and go, "Haha, nice hair though."
What?
they'd, they'd look at me and say, "Nice hair though," because
All right.
nice hair.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny too because I think we could also talk about Mulcair's beard, and he's tried to use
It
that,
is marvelous.
right? That's my point. I think he almost took a cue out of Justin's playbook, um, trying to make his beard have kind of like have it be a character of his own.
Right.
But I mean that's again, it's kind of like prettying up the pig a little bit. What are you, unless you're going to start having kind of concrete discussions about certain things, it's a distraction. And this election has been full of like really bizarre distractions.
No. No. Our election campaign has been nothing but civil thus far.
Right, right. It's scary.
That said, Matt, you might be more familiar than I am. Have you seen the pictures of the campaign buttons with Thomas Mulcair's beard on it?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Do you remember what it says?
I don't.
Oh,
What does it say?
I don't remember either. That was a genuine question.
Oh,
Oh. Oh.
Yep.
I
it
mean,
seems
it
like the thing
performs.
one could Google pretty easily, and I think I'll be the one to do that.
Cool.
Oh, okay.
That sounds good. I've got a
Rob's gonna
whole
be our go-to Googler.
Yeah.
I've got a whole thing going on in front of me. It's just better that Rob Googles it.
Do we want to talk about the actual, like, compare actual politics here, or do we want
Like
to
the
hold off
policies?
and talk about the election still for a bit?
Well, I don't know. I think there are a couple kind of cornerstone things that kind of lend themselves quite easily to discussing the differences between the two opposition parties, and
Yeah,
even
sorry, go ahead. There are a couple just really general like the big platform pillars really that could be
Mhm.
easily discussed.
Yeah, like I think we first kind of noted here that there's been a change in how many ridings are available in this election.
Yeah.
So it's gone up by 30 seats, which means the borders have actually changed and the ridings have increased. And it does kind of throw out the math a little bit. And that has kind of also changed the strategy for the parties who are trying to seek to put more members in parliament, right? I think I read somewhere at some point that there are less incumbents this time around, because there are so many retiring, there's so many politicians retiring, that
Yeah.
there are more legitimate three-way races than there has been in the last couple cycles. I think that's a bit of an interesting point too, because you're starting to get some more representative numbers, and you're beginning to have real cutthroat competitions in ridings where there used to be none.
hmm And like the only reason, or maybe who knows, but one of the prime reasons that Kent Hare is competitive currently in Calgary Centre is that the redistribution of Calgary Centre itself, it kind of shifted the riding eastward a little bit. So we picked up the more left-leaning neighborhoods of Inglewood, Ramsey, and
Hmm.
that kind of area, and ditched a bunch of stuff around South Calgary that is a traditionally conservative neighborhood.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's going to happen not necessarily towards the left, but more or less randomly, I guess, across the country.
Now, we I say we as in Canada, do we do like who decides who redraws the borders when you add seats? Like, is there the possibility of gerrymandering like you see in the U.S. when we
I
have
was
the
going to
people
say
in
that would be
charge?
the Ministry of Gerrymandering, I believe.
Yeah.
It's
Is that something that can happen here? Do you know, or is it just kind of drawn up by politicians like in general?
I'm not
Well,
actually sure.
yeah, Elections Canada is pretty good at that. Ridings are distributed based on populations in square areas, so it's not like the. I know that the. I actually don't. To be honest, I don't know entirely certain, but I'm not entirely certain. But for example, when Barrie was redrawn because the population kind of exploded, the borders were just slightly altered. But what they do is they do make it proportionally. It's not. Elections Canada is actually quite separate from that. It's not like there can be like a. I think there would be a bit of outcry personally, quite publicly from the House if they were ever to try and attempt what is happening in the U.S. by like gerrymandering little slivers of land and connecting them to other ones so that it
Yeah.
can, I don't think that would be I don't think that would go over pretty well here.
If we're remembering the clip on, I want to say it was the Daily Show, where they took pictures of electoral districts in the states and presented them as modern art, like
Yes.
that kind of thing doesn't seem to happen much here.
Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, the guy who was presenting it was so proud of himself because he had clumped together, like populations and stuff like that, and then you look at it and you go, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. No, it's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
Oh man. Yeah. Not at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. So I think maybe the fact that the writings have increased does kind of lend itself to having discussions about how our vote is even tallied, right?
Hmm.
Um, uh, it's interesting to note that I mean we don't have mandatory voting laws, for example, but the amount of writings increasing means that we're going to have a greater degree of representation.
Yeah.
I mean that's the argument, right? Is that as the population grows, we're going to have more representatives, and we're going to achieve a certain degree of better representation in the House. I don't know where they're going to put these members, and I don't know if they're going to sit on the floor cross-legged or how exactly that's going to work. But I'm sure they'll figure something out.
Yeah.
Well, apparently that's actually a big problem in the United Kingdom because, I mean, back when they made the actual physical Parliament buildings, I don't know when that was, but I'm not sure they envisioned a nation of 60 million people and the representation required for that many.
No kidding.
But yeah, I don't know. Like maybe they'll start spilling into the press gallery eventually, or
Well, I was
tiny
thinking maybe
seats.
those like hanging basket chairs, those could work. And then they could like they could, wheel them or pulley them up when they don't need them.
Now,
Or hammock.
do we remember the scene from the Star Wars prequels where they had those little floaty things that
Yeah.
stuck to the walls? Maybe that's what we need. And the
And then
Speaker
we
of the
could
House can have a big one right in the middle.
yeah. Yeah.
That sounds fantastic.
I think what we need first is a Sith Lord to shoot lightning out of his fingers. Which, I mean, you can make the argument we already have.
It was John
So
Baird.
it was he looks so good in a cloak.
If we have any viewers out there who are Photoshop savvy, I would
Oh,
like to see one of the pictures of John Baird where he's like, viewers can watch me do it. Like the
Yeah.
angry face and the point. If you could
Yeah.
get some electricity coming out of that pointing finger, that would be
Oh,
perfect.
please do
that would
that. Yes.
that would be so good.
Oh man. So I have a live update on the beard pin situation, button situation.
Merciful muffins.
The quote is "beard a part of it," which is not great. That's not
Oh,
great at all.
you know what? That's follicleist. I
Yeah.
think people who are or follically not as follically inclined might take offense to that, for one.
Yeah.
There's also just the chance for confusion because in Calgary Centre, the NDP candidate, Dr. Gillian Ratty, wonderful woman, very nice, does not have a beard.
Yeah.
That said, Will Hatch of the Libertarian Party seemed to be able to grow a nice beard, and several of his staff had very impressive beards.
Hmm.
And does that steer people the wrong way? Is that a
It
strategic
might.
gaffe? I don't know. I'm just asking these questions.
Well, in terms of strategy, you could make the argument that a beard cutout to put on the
Mhm.
sign of NDP candidates in ridings across the
Ooh,
country would and could be a very appropriate electioneering method. Now,
that
it's
would be
hard to say,
spectacular.
it's hard to say if people would take that to the next level and could just beard any candidate. Because I would love to see personally what Justin Trudeau would like with his hair and Tom Mulcair's beard.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah,
That's the dream right there.
yeah. I'm thinking about it. I'm looking off into the distance and thinking about it.
Hey, so Matt, you mentioned before, not strategic voting. We'll talk about that later. But you mentioned mandatory voting, which is a thing
Mm.
in Australia.
Yeah, that's true. There's a law
Yeah.
that come election day, you are required to show up at the polls, and I think it's an incredibly great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get if you don't show up, if you're not on the registered, if you don't show up on the day and do your thing, you get a fine.
How much is it? The fine?
I'm not sure, but it's pretty prohibitive. It's to the effect
Hmm.
of $100 or something.
That's worth going and voting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean it takes no time at all. Now it's different here because there's preferential voting, and we also, I mean,
Oh yes.
Australians also vote for the Senate as well.
Okay.
So they cast votes in their upper house elections, which is interesting because they vote twice as often for their Senate. No, they don't. Sorry, it's a 6-year term, and they vote. The Senate goes to the polls. Half of them will go at one time. So
Okay.
the 6-year terms are staggered, which is interesting. But yeah, the preference voting is I think there's actually some interest in reforming that process because you tend to get a lot of parties making deals with one another, and you tend to get representatives of very small niche parties getting Senate seats, because they have a deal with, let's say, the number one group. So let's say Labour, which is the big kind of left of center party here, makes a preference deal with the Greens. Or no, I'm sorry, not the Greens, because the Greens get their own seats in their own ways. But let's say the Labour, let's say they'll make a preference with the boating enthusiast party, and the Labour will get a huge chunk of the vote, of the popular vote, and all of a sudden there's a boating enthusiast party representative in the Senate for 6 years, and they end up casting important votes on on matters of parliament. Not saying that boating enthusiasts aren't people,
Of course.
but it's that's actually quite a common occurrence.
Now, are you saying voting enthusiasts or boating?
Boating.
They sound very similar.
I'm saying boating, and in all actuality, there is a member in the Senate right now of the motoring
Okay.
enthusiast party,
Hmm.
and it was quite he was quite gaffe prone, because he would do interviews and he would choke up in the middle of interviews and say, "Hey, can we start this over?" And the tape would be rolling, and he'd be like sweating and like taking off his glasses and like trying to compose himself because he had never been in front of a camera before. He had never been in a nationwide interview. It does kind of lend itself, that method kind of lends itself to these deals which put awkward individuals into the limelight.
Hmm.
And that's a fantastic level of political engagement in which boating enthusiasts might take a seat within the upper and lower chamber.
Yeah.
But quick thoughts, because one election issue is democratic reform, and I wanted to hear Matt's thoughts on STV versus MMP, because I'm sure Rob knows, but I'm not sure Rob cares terribly
I
much.
watch all of CGP Grey's Voting in the Animal Kingdom videos.
And so that's why I think you know, but do you care?
I do care, but I also want to hear Matt's first.
Okay,
Well,
good.
perhaps you can provide just a little bit of background for those watching.
No, they
Kind
can
of
look it up themselves.
what the difference is. No, because I think it's important to discuss the merits of each versus first past the post, right? I have my clear preference, but I think when you're talking about changing a system that's so antiquated, like first past the post, the delineations are incredibly important, and what they actually what they mean, right?
Right.
Basically, in honesty, I'm more in favor of mixed member proportional.
Classic Matt. Classic NDP Matt.
Yeah, yeah. But
That's good.
I just think I just think the popular vote. I just think the popular vote is skewed out. I think you have a large percentage, which kind of sits around about 60% of the population not voting. First of all, that's the big one, and you also have a system which creates artificially kind of boosted races, and it defaults towards the incumbent. I think I don't think that's very democratic, personally. Mixed member proportional would kind of channel the popular vote more correctly, and you would also vote on a local level and on a federal level as well. So more people voting more often and more representative means kind of a greater effect in the House.
Now that is interesting, because my understanding of mixed member proportional was that you would only cast one ballot. One ballot. And I was kidding earlier. For those that don't know, mixed member proportional is a system in which you cast apparently one or two ballots. But
No, I think you're right. I think I might have actually got that confused.
okay.
But
In any case, what will happen is you will have the local races, and you will elect people, directly elect people, and then at the end of it, the long and short of it is they will tally up who has representation in the House and compare that to the share of seats versus the popular vote. And to kind of shore up those underrepresented parties, what they'll do is each party will submit a list of potential additions to the House, and those list members will they will end up, filling the gap basically. Wow, that was terrible.
The,
Go watch CGP Gray's video. He does a
yeah,
great
I'll
job.
put a link to CGP Gray's Voting in the Animal Kingdom YouTube playlist.
Please do.
He does it really well.
I'd
So
I'd
well.
love to watch that actually. That'd be pretty cool. I haven't seen it.
It does a really good job of explaining the single transferable vote.
Yeah. Yeah, he does one on a bunch of different voting systems, and I think he wants kind of a hybrid that has the best parts of all of them voting systems.
Does he? I'm
And
not
that's
sure
what
I've
he's
seen that.
trying to advocate for, yeah.
Well, what's your preference, Rob?
I honestly, because I don't know, like the only voting systems that I can really comment on are ones that I've actually seen in practice, and the the best ones that I've heard proposed I haven't seen in practice yet, so I can't really suggest those, but I think it'd be interesting to at least try those. It'd almost be cool to do. I suggest outlandish things sometimes. I think it'd be cool to do like a demo run where we just go through kind of a mock election and see what the results would be. Rather, like that would even be even better than polling. Like midway point of the election cycle, do like a mock election just to see what's up and test a voting system.
A plebiscite for the purposes of seeing, quote, what is up.
Well, because you could even do it. That kind of thing could happen online. It wouldn't have to be a paper ballot. You obviously could, but that could also be a thing to test online voting, which I think is something that will happen across sort of developed nations as time goes on, as the internet becomes a thing, and we have more certainty and security, and in like fraud detection, that kind of thing. But all that to say, in terms of voting systems, I see some very obvious shortcomings that could be addressed with Canada's voting system, but I'm not sure what we could adopt that would fix those problems.
That's interesting. I think there's something definitely in the concept of now that we have the internet, this wonderful creation, and we use it all the time to kind of keep up with what's going on in our democracy. There's an opportunity there that I think we're missing. I don't necessarily condone things like electronic ballots, because I think that those kind of leave the whole program, the whole system exposed to fraud. But there are kind of interesting things, for example, like plebiscites or referendums, where we can actually perhaps, there's more efficient polling methods than just ringing people up on a telephone. If you can get, if you can, for example, have a publicly funded, or if you can have publicly funded infrastructure that correlates public opinion, that's publicly funded range of issues as the issues come up, you can actually give a certain amount of insight, or you can get rather a certain amount of insight into what people are thinking, rather than just because right now polling is it's disproportionate. I think you can make arguments that stratified sampling is representative of kind of opinion, but we've seen kind of a collapse in support for polling in the UK, in the US, because the predictions just don't end up being true. So going back to talking about like what reforms are available, there's so much opportunity here, and I think we're missing out on it because we're not as engaged perhaps as we could be.
For sure.
Now, I suppose I'll jump in and say my preference
Yeah.
for the next voting system in Canada would be the single transferable vote, which is much more difficult to explain. Essentially, you rank people on the ballot. Your ridings, like our ridings, would be much bigger to encompass, 2, maybe 3 members. And then rather than just whoever gets the most seats takes that many people, it'll more closely reflect the popular vote in
Mm.
that you're directly electing X number of people in your riding. And so, if someone gets a wide majority of support, if it's enough to elect 2 people under, there'll be a certain threshold for who gets to go to parliament and who doesn't.
Mhm.
And if your party gets enough to be over the threshold twice, you get 2 members. If it's not quite like that, they start dropping off people with the lowest amount of votes and go to their next preference.
Mm.
That said, I'm not entirely sure how on earth Australia does it, because I have worked exactly one election, and counting up all the ballots just for, it was 4 or 5 people, that took long enough. I'm not sure how on earth you would do it without the use of computers.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've seen what the ballots look like. I don't know if any of you have seen what the ballots look like here.
No.
But they're like A4 pages. They're
Holy.
huge. And they've just got like a column of boxes down the side, and you just mark them off.
Turns out they're all Scantrons.
Yeah.
Bubbles for first, second, third, and fourth choices.
Look how that worked out. Out university career.
No one has ever messed up a Scantron before in their lives, so
Definitely
it would
not.
be perfect.
Yeah.
I used to fill those out with Crayola.
That explains why you're very poor grades in school.
No, that doesn't explain it at all.
The matter was entirely unrelated, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
But
good.
so the thing about STV and MMP is that they are trying to prevent a problem that's encountered in first past the post. And honestly, knowing about these now, I think first past the post is named ironically because I feel like single transferable vote would be better described as first past the post,
Yeah, for
in
sure.
that the minimum threshold would be the post.
That's correct.
But first past the post is just, winner takes all.
Yeah.
Most votes in the riding gets the seat in Parliament. And honestly, I do like the element in that scheme that you do have the direct representation, because I feel like a problem with MMP would be that you have list members that are beholden to nobody but the party, and
That's correct.
that just, like, if a member of parliament really, really cheeses the electorate, the electors can then turf them in the next election, regardless how they feel about the party affiliation.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like list members invites party hackery, and that's really my only problem with it. But the other thing to mention about first past the post is that it leads to a problem, and that problem is known as strategic voting,
Oh God.
which is our
I know
which is
this
our
will come.
which is our next segment,
Yeah.
next talking point.
Yeah. What do you know about strategic voting, Rob?
Uh, so from me, I I'll give some backstory. I took the vote compass that CBC has put on this election
Hmm.
and just found myself in a little love triangle right between the Green Party, the NDP, and the Liberals.
Oh yeah.
That's
And
hot.
yeah, so from my perspective, any of those parties would be possible voting choices.
Okay.
And so for me, what I want to do is support basically because those 3 parties are separate, even though again for me they're very similar politically, and so I'm inclined to possibly vote for any of them. But I know
What?
that I'm not going to vote conservative.
Okay.
So from my perspective, strategic voting is something that I could do in order to help knock off the Conservatives because they're diametrically opposed to most of the things that I want from a government.
Okay. Okay.
And so that's what ends up happening with me is that I'm basically stuck choosing our incumbent when my riding the incumbent's Liberal, but the NDP have been coming up, and so I don't know exactly what's going to happen here. But for a long time, it's been Liberal here, and so strategic voting for me in my particular riding might not help because the Conservatives don't have a very strong showing right here. But strategic voting is voting for the team that you. It's essentially making a vote not for the other guy and trying not to vote for whoever comes in second place on the left
Yeah,
side.
that's right.
In this
That's
case,
right.
because we have multiple left-wing parties.
I think the major takeaway from that is it's a vote against, not a vote for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the problem because you lack voter engagement because they don't end up voting for who they actually want in Parliament. They vote for the person they think can beat the person they really don't like.
Exactly.
Which is just silly. And I mean, strategic voting could play a large role in this riding. Because the latest Main Street poll that came out had Kent Hare at 38% support. What's her name? Joan Crockett at 37, and Gillian Ratty of the NDP at 19.
Mm-hmm.
So if Ratty's got those votes locked in, it could be the reason that Crockett gets voted in. But if there's swing support, like if they're willing to vote Liberal because they really, really hate Crockett, then Kent Hare could be the beneficiary. But
see, and this I think is a very telling example because what it does is it shows that strategic voting is an evolution or an adaptation to a system which is inherently flawed.
Yeah.
That the foundation has eroded with first past the post, and the way that the kind of electioneering mechanisms of the party have adapted is to at least keep in the back of their mind that strategic voting could help unelect people. So now we're essentially in a system where we're unelecting representatives, not electing representatives.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of at the core of my frustration with this whole election and the whole system in particular, is that unless we start having a discussion about replacing first past the post, there are these myriad of issues that are kind of codependent, and the linchpin seems to be first past the post, right?
Yep.
So when you're talking, for example, about a really tight race like you are, and you have people door knocking and they're saying, well, your best bet to unelect this person is to vote for this person, and you look at a list and of all the things that this person stands for, and you don't agree with them, but you vote for them anyway. What are you doing? I don't understand.
Well, and I mean, in fairness, if there was a poster child for someone begging to be unelected, it would probably be Joan Crockett. She has been a vocal opponent of such socialist things as libraries.
Oh my God.
And voted against a bunch of the LGBTQ rights bills. She later said because they didn't go far enough, but
that's progress.
Yeah, that's.
No.
If it doesn't go far enough, you may as well just vote the thing down, right? That's
definitely.
One interesting thing that I've been following about this whole strategic voting nonsense is I've been listening to a lot of CBC radio, and in the last week or so, the Current they've had quite a few discussions on strategic voting. So they brought in representatives from the main organizations like Vote Together and Late Now to discuss the merits or opposition to strategic voting. And one interesting thing that I took from that was that these organizations are largely donation funded, and they've been crowdfunding public opinion polls, stratified sampled public opinion polls that are accurate within, a significant margin. So they've got, I think, maybe 3.5%, 19 times out of 20, which is around the same degree of accuracy that federal or like national polling companies are doing their work. And it brought out this interesting kind of anecdotal comment about how these are crowd-funded companies who are doing a polling in ridings to oust members where they think national polling companies aren't being representative. And then it also came out that parties themselves are doing polls, daily polls in these little ridings and not publishing them because that's kind of where their strategy is at. So you have like 3 different levels of polling that are occurring in every riding every week across this country for how many weeks has this election been going on?
Too many.
And we're getting piecemeal amounts of data that are essentially arguing with each other. Like it's so convoluted.
Yeah.
Unless you're an adherent of 308.com, which is now an outdated.
Yeah, it's gonna have to change.
Yeah.
I love Eric Grenier. I think his analysis is so interesting, and he's actually been hired by CBC now to do all their poll.
Yeah, he runs the poll tracker.
Yeah.
Also the pollcast, the election pollcast. If you haven't listened, it's worth a listen.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It's super interesting. So I would urge any viewers out there to first of all, take polling with a grain of salt because everybody is going to skew polling to try and to maximize their argument, I think. But listen to Eric Grenier because he's able to kind of very finely analyze a lot of these polls that are coming out.
Huh.
Yep. Well, I mean, even oh man, where was I going with that? Nope, it's gone. Sorry.
So what we should talk about, I guess, is what are you guys done with strategic voting? Like, basically, the lesson is
no. I'm a big adherent.
Wait,
you're a big adherent of strategic voting.
Yeah, and I mean, under the first past the post system, I mean, it's the best hope you have. Or do you mean, are we done talking about it, Rob?
Well, no. I was asking if you had anything else to say on the matter, but there was some controversy that I saw, and I don't actually know if it was ever resolved, but where one of the strategic voting organizations was actually giving misleading information, telling people to vote Liberal in certain ridings where Liberals were not leading in polls against the NDP.
Well, that's not the case. If we're talking about the same Facebook post, then
that's what I'm saying. I don't know the resolution, but the whole thing creeps me out now because I don't know.
I did some very limited follow-up. Matt, feel free to jump in and verbally berate me. But
I'm ready. I'm poised.
Coiled. Okay, good. I can't see you, but I believe you. So I followed up with some of that, and the methodology, as far as I saw it, for who was it? It was Lead Now, or I think it was Lead Now, actually.
Okay.
But they were going off of polling data and/or 308.com, which is a poll aggregator. So it says, if these are all statistically valid samples, then you put them all together and you have a more accurate representation of what's actually going on.
Yeah, it's a metasynthesis, right?
I don't know what that word means, but it sounds right, yes.
Yeah, it's a poll of polls. Like, it's essentially a synthesis poll, yeah.
Now, riding by riding, it is a little more flawed. It gets close to about 90% accurate, which is incredible, given, what we've had before. But you still have that 10% margin of error because it's really just taking national polling numbers and applying them to, a riding level.
Mm-hmm.
But all that said, if the organization didn't have polls that they had done themselves, they deferred to the expertise of 308.com for their further recommendations on a riding level. But the objections placed by this person, I don't actually remember the name, but the objections raised were that they were recommending liberals in ridings that had gone NDP in 2011.
Hmm.
Right.
Which is just inherently flawed because,
is.
I mean, the voter sentiment in 2011 is not necessarily the same now as it was then.
That's right.
And
I mean, look at
my
Quebec.
my honest guess would be that that was a pro-change voter who now sees the liberal bandwagon as the better alternative to, or the better way to defeat Harper.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's my honest read of it. And she said, go to vote together to get all your recommendations instead of this horribly flawed one. But the one she recommended had exactly the same recommendations for all the ridings that she cited as being problems.
My read of this, and I'm trying to parse perhaps the context in which this person was making their argument, but
Are you questioning sobriety?
look, I'm caffeinated out of my mind, so I'm in no position to quote sobriety. But no, look, these organizations have connections to political establishments across the country, and I think there is a certain degree of bias when looking at some of the numbers and recommendations that are coming out. It should be noted, at the very least, that some of these connections are very subtle, but they do exist. So this is my other problem with strategic voting, is that it's kind of almost like the super PAC system in the States. Like, there are no formal affiliations between a lot of those organizations and the parties or the representatives themselves. But I would not be surprised if names start to pair up. If you were to seriously look at some of the volunteers, some of the workers, and those of the representative parties, it happens. I think almost it's a bit of a misinformation campaign, just as much as it is trying to establish defeat or trying to get rid of certain representatives.
Yeah. This reminds me, the whole kind of comparison to super PACs, and it's so flawed in that, like, that sort of system where people don't conspire, they don't officially conspire, but there's obviously some backdoor dealings. Just takes me back to, again, going back to Stephen Colbert and his super PAC, and then the super PAC SSH, with this, like, where he was literally able to obviously get secret money, and then he decided to run, and so he transferred it on air to Jon Stewart, and then Jon Stewart gave it back when he decided not to run. Like, the whole thing, like, the fact that that's legal is just crazy, and I can't see something like that not also happening in Canada. Maybe not, yeah. Obviously we don't have a super PAC system, but, like, anything that's supposed to be illegal or extremely frowned upon probably happens just as much here as it does there.
I don't know. I mean, granted, I wasn't particularly high-powered, but on our campaign, I was going to say, like, we didn't really talk to the biggest, most active group here is One Vote Matters. They actually have lawn signs they're putting up.
Right.
And we didn't really hear from them, with the exception of this poor woman who wanted one of our election signs, but only if she could have a One Vote Matters sign as well, because she wanted to formally endorse us to, end swing support, or end something swing voting support, yada yada.
Yeah.
And we had no formal relations with that organization.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't even know how to contact them.
Yeah.
We just, but one of the members of their board was like, she used to be on our campaign and
Yeah.
then left for a while,
Right.
but there was no formal affiliation at all.
And I'm sure those arrangements occur across the country.
That said, I mean, we also, one of our commitments at a campaign level was to run it clean. Like,
Yeah.
they actually said, like, listen, if you think you're in a gray area when you're about to do something, then don't do it.
Right.
At least because the thought was, if Kent wins and someone challenges it, you don't want that challenge to go anywhere.
Right.
Right.
As opposed to some other ridings in Canada.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
What, like evil electioneering techniques?
Yeah, just possible writings where maybe, or not writings, but instances in this election where maybe that could happen, where if someone were to raise questions, they would find something.
Like, say, for example, just crazy pulling it out of the sky. Say you're putting up election signs, and you see one of your opponent's election signs. Say you
Yeah.
don't like the look of that election sign. Say you take it down.
Yeah.
That's it turns out that's a violation of federal law.
Yeah.
And say
And-
you happen to be senior campaign staff, and say you also had a secret meeting with the leader of the party.
Who happens
Just
to be the
saying.
prime minister?
Yeah,
I'm if one were to hypothetically, of course, suggest such a course of action, one would be, well, it would be illegal, I would think.
it would be.
Very illegal.
And highly unethical.
Highly unethical.
Unless
Mostly.
you feel that the ends justify the means. And
Yeah. See, this is the great thing about cell phones, right? You can just record these things.
Yeah. And they are doing that.
yeah.
Wow.
Say you happened to be recorded while you were doing this thing, shady thing.
And say it just happens to be broadcast nationwide on the national broadcaster.
Say it happened to be the fourth election in a row that party had been caught in shady dealings.
Yes. Dubious comes to mind
Yeah.
as the word.
My favorite kind of poutine is Pierre poutine.
This is a lot of political references I don't get. Not at all. Is there any other shady stuff going on that you guys are aware of that maybe other people should be aware of?
At our local riding level, we actually found a ditch full of Kent Hare signs recently. And by we, I mean they.
Right.
Yeah, see, that's scary. And it's simple because it's really easy to take out your aggression on a lawn sign. I know I've dreamt about it, but crossing the line, the legal line there, that's the worry. And the fact that we have to actually actively legislate that to prevent people from doing it is again a symptom of terrible practices. I don't know.
Although I will say that there is not always the intent to break the law. There was someone arrested this electoral cycle because they were wandering along just trashing election signs. And they were stopped. They were like, you can't do this. And he's like, what are you talking about? It's illegal. You can't do that. It's vandalism. But I'm angry. I'm angry at these people, and I wanted to destroy their signs. Like,
yeah, I know. And look, as a graphic designer, I find it abhorrent because
Definitely.
I think somebody put a lot of work into those signs, and to see them get chainsawed, I don't know if any of them have actually been chainsawed, but I can just imagine Stephen Harper wielding a chainsaw and running through a riding.
Definitely doing them himself, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
for
picturing
sure.
it. Just running through Calgary Heritage.
Yeah, next thing, front page of the Globe and Mail will be him drop kicking an NDP sign in Calgary Center.
No, he'd stick to Heritage, I'm pretty sure.
Mm.
Which is
Um,
also a new riding, fun fact. It used to be Calgary Southwest, and he's running in Calgary Heritage.
oh, that's right. That's correct. I see.
Also,
I'm amazed at how many new writings there are. That's really cool.
also, his campaign vehicle is named the Steve Van, which is still just. I'm
It's the
convinced
worst.
that's the best. That's the best political vehicle there is on the road today.
He
The Steve
undoubtedly
Van.
came up with that himself.
See, now I'm just thinking I have a better slogan for the NDP under Tom Mulcair. Put a beard on it. You get a Portlandia reference that
Yeah.
obviously hipsters are going to get, and they're trying to get young people to vote. People who watch Portlandia are
And
tending,
now it's my
they're
turn
tending
to not get the reference.
good. They have you've ever heard of Portlandia?
No.
It's a
Oh
show
my
with
God. What?
it's a very funny show, and they're talking about hipster culture in Portland. Fred Armisen he was on SNL. He's now doing it with Carrie Brownstein, another comedian, and they do a thing where they basically put a bird on all kinds of artisanal goods like handbags, hats, anything like a bowl. They just say put a bird on it. That's their business's slogan. And I think put a beard on it would be a really good slogan, and you could just slap beards on anything.
Yeah, of course.
That would be perfect viral marketing.
It would.
If it didn't, well, I don't know. I would worry about vandalism and then it comes back on the campaign, but
But it's just a sticker. Like you could get,
viral marketing, that would be great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
fantastic.
I
You're welcome,
noticed
Mulcair.
that
You can use that next time around.
in our list of topics that we kind of brainstormed, there is something here about coalitions and kind of, I mean, on the same line in talking about electoral reform, democratic reform, and things. We are kind of a very classic Westminster system, and we're one of the only Westminster systems that doesn't have formal coalitions that often. We actually run into minority governments
Yeah.
headlong. I'd be keen to know what Nick thinks about uh, coalitions, because I know how I feel, and I'd really be interested to see what he thought.
What I think about coalitions? I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with them, and I would far rather see the coalition option to, I mean, just a formal amalgamation of the parties, because that was proposed over and over and over for the past decade for the
Mm,
NDP and the Liberals to just join up. And I don't know, I like having the three or greater parties that present three or more different styles of governance or ideas for how the country should be run.
Yeah.
right.
And granted, I don't know much about how formal coalitions work, other than the fact that you would just. My assumption is that you would just have an effective majority for the whole 4-year term or whatever. And I think, aren't there some parliaments where you have to gain that majority coalition before you take office?
In Canada?
No, like other countries. I'm more
Sorry,
asking
say
Matt.
that again. Say that again. Sorry.
So are there countries in which you have to have a formal coalition before you can take government, where you have to have it's a majority of the seats, not a plurality?
Yeah, well, the way it works, I know the way it works here is that so there's a coalition right now between the Liberal Party, which is right of center,
Hmm.
and the Nationals Party, which is far right. So they've kind of devised a coalition just to simply outnumber to take the majority of the seats. I'm not sure if it's a plurality or not. Um,
I get the
but
definition of plurality and majority mixed up all the time.
yeah, me too. Um, in any case, um, they definitely ran as a coalition,
Okay.
but but now they did so with the intent to win the election, obviously. But I know that, like for example, in Canada, they have to say the governor general writes them, "Can you form a government?" And that question is interesting because it essentially suggests that one person can lead the government by being propped up by another. And I think in the Canadian
Hmm.
context, that's the idea of what a coalition would look like. Um, as opposed to like a merger where there would actually be a formal merger and they would adopt a new name, kind of like what the Conservative Party did. What was it, 2006?
Somewhere
When
around
they,
there, yeah.
Something like I want to say 2005, but
yeah, something like that. And
yeah. In any case,
that's when Harper, took out Stockwell Day and basically merged those parties, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, so I think I don't know.
because that's like
Yeah,
almost that was an effective coalition of the Progressive Conservatives and the Canadian Alliance.
that's right.
But I mean, oh,
Um,
it occurs to me I didn't actually answer your original question. In
well, I guess my yeah, yeah, that's okay. It's interesting though to talk about that because the maybe I'm not talking about a merger. I'm talking about an agreement, a governing agreement
yeah, yeah,
that after the governor general, I mean, Stephen Harper, regardless of whether he wins or loses a majority of the seats, he will be asked if he can form government. I'm sure he will try, but he will fail.
I don't think
Uh,
he's gonna try.
you don't think he's going to try? I think he's going to try. Why wouldn't he
I
try?
he
Tried
was
to
the
cling
one
on to
who
power using every method he possibly could have.
I think
Sorry, I
he
don't
referred to I think he referred to the vote of non-confidence as a parliamentary trick at one point. He is not a fan of the rules as they are written.
Well, I guess that's true. I mean, he did shut the entire thing down twice to
Yeah.
avoid a public inquest into.
And
Uh,
there was an editorial cartoon that they posted a big uh, compilation of all the editorial cartoons that have happened for this election, and
oh,
one of them
cool.
was him standing in front of a witch, and the witch is like turning a cauldron or something and looking at scrolls and going, "It's just as we feared. We can't prorogue it."
Yeah, exactly. And this is why I think he will. There will be a last-ditch attempt for him to maintain power, and I don't know what he'll do. I read also somewhere that he technically doesn't have to give a throne speech for a year.
Hmm.
So he doesn't. The only way the opposition, even after an election, can form government is by voting him down, right? So he doesn't even have to bring Parliament back together until June 2016. Um, so he could wait, and if he doesn't get the numbers he likes, he could re-roll the dice, um, which it's in the books just as much as the NDP coming out and getting a majority government right now is. So
Hmm.
I don't know.
That's terrifying. I had not heard that, and I don't.
I actually heard about that in who was it? Mansbridge. Peter Mansbridge's interview with one of the leaders. He was saying, "Well, actually, Stephen Harper does have the first crack at forming government."
Hmm.
And I went,
He does.
"What?" And I'm glad I finally know what he was talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the election, and this is what I mean. The election also too is kind of a sham Because it's like, oh yeah, we cast our ballots, but we don't actually have decisions until 3 months later.
Right.
Thank goodness we have the Queen if this gets messy.
Oh, for sure.
She commands our armed forces, you know.
Break out your cotton gloves.
Imagine she just shows up in Parliament one day, walks straight up to Harper, takes off a glove, and slaps him across the face with
Yeah.
it.
Oh, that'd be great.
Go to
Wouldn't
your
it, though?
room.
Stephen, you're behaving improperly.
Oh man.
Dear.
So, yeah, in terms of actual formal coalitions, I honestly kind of like the dynamic we have right now, in which, I mean, in this next parliament, anyone could be a kingmaker, and I think that's a really interesting dynamic. So I'm not sure I really like the idea of formal coalitions, but we basically have informal coalitions to get everything done currently, don't we?
Well, I
In a minority
suppose,
parliament, I mean.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they essentially have to convince other parties to gain a majority vote on issues, right?
Yeah, which usually ends up with concessions, which usually means it represents more of the people's will than it would have otherwise.
Yeah, and again, I think that's also a trick of the mind. We think that, for example, one party suggests one course of action, another party suggests another course of action, and somewhere in the middle is where we kind of end up. But those concessions ultimately aren't representative of the people because it's not a proper barometer, right? You're kind of working in no man's land. Just because it's middle ground doesn't mean that it's actually representative. It just means that at some point you have very watery deals that end up could potentially get overturned with another government, or there are little concessions that are slipped in there that are very American in style and that we don't perhaps know. Like look at the omnibus bill. This is a kind of another.
Which one? Because I mean, there have been so many in the past decade.
It's a peripheral topic, right? It's like how many of these bills have passed and we don't the text we don't actually know kind of what's being done, right? So this is why.
And I mean that's good old Stevie Harper, trying to maximize the efficiency of government. Why pass all of these bills when we could just pass them all at once?
Yes, exactly. So I mean, when we make deals about policy, I think both sides are equally. I don't know. I lost my train of thought, but I think you understand kind of my argument.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of formal versus informal coalitions, would not a formal coalition demand similar concessions?
Yes, but they would be public.
Fair enough.
So I think now is probably a good time to talk about some of the actual issues dividing our country against Harper, because it's like most of them
each
do.
Other.
Yeah, you might be right.
And so why don't we start with? I see an acronym here, TPP. I've seen it 1,000 times this election cycle, but I don't really know what it is.
It is the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Mm-hmm.
It is meant to be a free trade deal along the lines of NAFTA, but with 22 member states?
I thought it was 14 signatories. It might be something like 20 states.
Ish. I'm blanking on the number, but it's a free trade deal, the details of which we are not privy to.
That's correct.
That's ironic, but all right.
Is it ironic?
So yeah, it is. It is. It's certainly not free. That's all right.
Yeah.
This is a very. It's a very. I've done a lot of talking about this personally, but I'm of the mind that you can look at the text, the preliminary text on WikiLeaks first of all, which is super boring, but it
Can you actually?
Yeah, it's been leaked.
Jiminy Jillikers.
But you can the gist of it is, just like Nick said, it kind of replaces NAFTA in the North American context. But what it also does is it opens up Pacific-facing countries in South America, Asia, and Australia and New Zealand as well, to kind of remove tariffs, right? It's an issue, and the secrecy issue is incredibly important because it's essentially making the argument that corporations have been involved in lobbying these signatory governments for the last several years into, well, they've essentially been bullying them into getting these tariffs removed so that they can increase profits when trading with other countries, right? Because that's a major barrier to making a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And the concern is that these corporations have been sitting around the table with these governments for so long, and we don't know what they've been talking about. There's a lot of fear that's been kind of projected out into the public about what deals have been made. Let me pose an example for you. So there is text in there saying that if a corporation feels slighted by a certain government or feels that a government is passing laws that can impinge on that corporation's profits, that corporation can sue the government, which means that effectively a government can sue people for passing laws that might harm that corporation's business. In Australia, it would essentially open cigarette companies. It would allow cigarette companies to sue the government for passing plain packaging laws. So the government here, for example, several years ago passed very extensive laws prohibiting the marketing of cigarettes on the sale of cigarettes. So you now can buy cigarettes that are very prohibitively expensive, but are covered in very graphic imagery and text meant to dissuade people from buying cigarettes. Now, Philip Morris I'm pretty sure they're at the bargaining table, this entire deal. But if the deal is passed in its current form, they plan on opening a lawsuit against the Australian government for essentially preventing profit maximization for the sale of cigarettes. You also have companies that are in the pharmaceutical sector looking to roll back certain legislations allowing cost-effective measures to be put on medication so that people can get better access to them. It's essentially privatizing a lot of these kind of bulk purchasing deals that governments have instituted to provide better medication to people. If Tom Mulcair gets elected, I know that he said he wants to institute a national pharmacare program to lower the prices of medications for the elderly and for middle-aged Americans who are kind of needing those medications more often. And that would be a direct contrast. And any kind of plan, like the National Pharmacare Plan, would, under TPP, be targeted for a lawsuit.
Wow.
Incidentally, I recently heard about Sweden's National Pharmacare Plan, and it's fantastic. I don't know why we're not doing it. It sounds amazing.
Yeah. A lot of people are screaming bloody murder because those big programs are they're seen as kind of very overarching and oppressive. I mean, look at what happened to the National Energy Plan in Canada years and years ago. I mean, I think we're far too ideological to even consider those plans, but I think that's what makes the NDP stick out, because they're looking at kind of overarching federal organization of those kinds of things.
So, in the end, from me, someone who hasn't heard much about this, this sounds like a step in the wrong direction. It sounds like corporations are trying to push this through, and really it's not in the best interest of the people in the countries involved.
I'll play devil's advocate briefly if you want.
Before you go, Nick, I do want to say that might be my personal opinion, but okay. Of course free trade is incredibly important, and I think the issue perhaps is that if free trade is committed in secret, um, it's like you said, it's a bit ironic. It's
Yeah.
not really. It's if it's not transparent, we don't kind of know what we're getting ourselves into, and the argument needs to be put out there that for us to kind of have proper debate about what kind of deal would replace NAFTA, we need to actually see the text, and we need to kind of pick it apart because if it's done in secret, we don't know what we're getting into. Sorry, Nick.
No worries. Um, on the side of the TPP, um, I mean, free trade often leads to economic booms. Like, just imagine what Vegemite sales will do once those horrific tariffs are lifted.
Yeah, I still can't convince people to eat Vegemite that aren't Australian. So I really, I hate to admit it, but I think your argument might be flawed there.
Well, no, but I mean, the whole point of free trade is that you eliminate tariffs, and I forget I watched the crash course video on this recently.
Right.
But you're saying there's a certain peak production that a nation can reach. And so, say in Canada, we're very good at making uh, airplanes, and we're great at making airplanes, really good at it. But we also need other things like shoes. But we have a finite amount of labor, so
Yeah.
for every worker we pull off airplanes and put onto shoes, false dichotomy aside, we're losing out on the airplanes we could be building for a very, very high value because we're
Yeah,
putting people on shoes.
that's
But say
correct.
you open up a free trade deal with a place like Vietnam, who is not quite as developed industrially as we are,
But they need
and
airplanes.
yeah, they need airplanes, and they can make shoes just fine.
Yeah.
So let the Vietnamese make the shoes, let the Canadians make the airplanes, and you both end up better because of it. And so if you have a deal on this scale, like 22 signatory states all along the Pacific Rim, like you could feasibly have an explosion. Mind you, I'm not sure what on earth we'd make that, I mean, the Japanese couldn't make better, but sorry,
Yeah, I
pause for
mean,
the laughter.
Yeah.
And yep, that's 3, 2, 1. Good. Okay, laughter
oh,
breaks over.
oh,
Yeah,
oh.
thanks. Um, but that's the argument for the TPP. It has very high potential. But I also agree with Matt in that I would like to see what it's about.
Mm.
Granted, because I think I heard this recently on a podcast or something. I cite all my sources very carefully.
Of course.
But they say you have to arrange these sorts of trade deals in secret because there is no way that you could do it publicly the whole way through without just raising hell on like in everybody's individual country at the same time, and it would never get
Oh,
done because there would be so much public outcry.
oh, that's true. That's true. It's definitely a communication strategy to keep this suppressed, mainly just because they want to get it done. And look, parliaments are going to have the opportunity to debate the particulars. I would
Yeah,
assume in the coming year, the big hurdle is going to be getting it through the U.S. Congress. But you're
yeah,
looking at trying to get it through the parliaments of all of these countries, and inevitably there are going to be um, opposition parties seeking to kind of yarn out the details so that we can have a proper discussion about it. Um, I can appreciate the argument that it promotes specialization. I understand that in kind of basic economic theory. But and two, when you start looking at the level of like the birth rate, for example, and how countries are kind of pivoting, especially Western countries now, are pivoting to a more services-based economy because they need um, because specialization has increased, right? So now we're kind of we're commodifying all the other specializations of all the other countries, right? That's kind of how this works.
yeah.
Um, but you are looking, for example, like I think the biggest concern is for dairy farmers or farmers, period, right?
Yeah, because we have a lot of protectionist policies in Canada.
Yes, exactly. And we have a very strong, there is a very strong union movement in Canada and
Is
Australia,
there ever?
and to kind of protect these agricultural industries. Um, Now, that being said, uh, and regardless of whether or not you have an opinion on the merits of that, um, these are people who do this for a living. These are people who are very good at what they do, and they're potentially looking at losing their jobs because, or losing their life's work because there may be a country that might be slightly better at it, and the marketization of that could lean in favor of somebody else being the specialist at doing that and affecting the prices of people who are producing very high quality goods but are exporting it incredibly cheaply.
I'll say what I think will really save our dairy farmers is poutine,
Mm.
because there is absolutely no way you can get that nice squeaky curd across the Pacific and have it remain squeaky.
Look, somebody told me that they could make poutine with bocconcini, and I scoffed. I'm still scoffing.
Did you slap them?
Well, no, because I would probably go to jail
You should
or
have.
be beaten up. I'm not a
No,
huge.
okay, that's fair enough too. Yeah.
Fucking kidding? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I mean, even Alberta, it's tough. I, I don't think they've had proper poutine before, most of them,
No,
because
no.
if they had, they would not stand for this.
No.
And do you see a person's eyes light up when they try proper poutine? Like you can't replace that.
I
You
wouldn't know,
can't.
Matt. I haven't seen it happen here. I mean, oh, they even have the audacity to call cheese curd here squeakers, and it doesn't squeak. It's been in the dairy fridge for I don't God knows how long by the time it's gotten to me.
Yeah.
Like
Um,
for all the
yeah.
things that Kai and I disagree on, we actually went to a farmers market kind of thing in British Columbia when we were there, and we tried a couple of the cheeses they had on display. And they go, "Oh, so you're from Ontario?" Yep. "Oh, then you'll be familiar with this. It's our curd. We call them squeakers." And Kai and I both try it. Hmm. It's like, yeah. What do you think? I'm like, hmm. So we walk away, and just the verbatim conversation out of our mouths. I said, "No." Kai goes,
No.
"No, absolutely
No.
not. No."
That's too bad.
Yeah. Protectionist tariffs. Poutine. Cheese curd.
Hey, look, I think there's a real opportunity to be poutine specialists, and the rest of the world needs to know that what we have to offer.
It's true.
But at the same thing, I think Canadians, by and large, are very good at other things as well.
Other
In
than
addition,
poutine.
in addition to, like, our maple syrup, for example, is world
Oh,
class,
yep. Yep.
right?
Right,
Um,
yeah.
what else do we do?
Beef.
Beef. Oh yeah, beef. Beef.
Softwood.
Oil's the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Potatoes.
Oil's big.
Oil's big,
It's
right?
kind of a
And so
big
that's
deal. It's a bit in the
so.
tank right now, but
But and see, this is the thing, right? It's you look at these countries, and a deal like this would actually help kind of more developing countries have access to cheaper energy, and that influx of cheaper energy would speed their development. But we have to ask ourselves if a deal like that is good for our economy. That's one thing, but is it good for the planet? And when global warming is such an incredible and potent issue right now, do we I have
except on
we
the
give
campaign trail, funnily enough.
that's what
Nobody
I
is
mean.
talking about climate change right now.
No.
And are we having an appropriate conversation about the effect of exporting that much energy? And is the science present and available for the Canadian voter to make an informed decision on which party is going to be a proper steward of our role in an energy economy that is contributing vastly to a warming atmosphere.
That's a
Like
great question.
Elizabeth May getting kicked out of the debates was a travesty
Yeah.
because you know it's like first of all it's like saying you're a woman and you're not even you can't sit at the big boy table. That's kind of one thing it blatantly looks like.
Well,
The
Matt, it's
second
a big boy table. She's a girl. You laid it out right there.
yeah.
Sarcasm. I'll just
I
Right.
fear that you don't come
I'll
off
just-
sarcastic enough.
I was gonna say it. I'll make sure to mention that I am being sarcastic. Yes.
Okay, yeah.
My favorite is deadpan sarcasm, which
Yeah.
may get me into trouble
To
one
a
of these
fault at
days.
that time, yes.
No. This won't be this podcast won't be referenceable or anything. It's not like it's on an internationally accessible publishing medium.
Certainly not.
Absolutely not.
No, of course not. And the other kind of problem with her not being present is that she's the biggest challenger to all three of them.
Oh man, and she was amazing in the first debate.
She was so good, and she's smart. She's like smart as a whip, and she's just as lethal, politically. So I'm concerned that we're not having her voice heard enough.
The tragedy is that she's excluded on the basis of popular vote. But if she had increased access to these debates, that might be the difference in the popular vote right there.
Yeah.
And this contributes significantly to the apathy that's existing, right? Because it's like a whirlpool of disaster.
Maybe.
Sorry, I cut you off, Nick. Please.
Oh no, I was going to say I'll also shift in my. It's terrible because my position aligns perfectly with the Liberals, but I mean the TPP in terms of what I think of it, I honestly don't know because we don't know the full text.
Mm-hmm.
And like even they wanted to make just like a spoiler sheet that the Conservatives could hand out before the election, and it's 47 hours now, or no, it's 46 hours until the polls close, and doesn't look like that's going to happen. Which, that's how that's going. Next June, yeah.
What other issues have you been privy to, Rob, that are kind of swirling around in your head in terms of the election?
Yeah, so the big thing that I've been hearing about, and it's the next, coincidentally, I believe, is the next thing, is the economy. I've been hearing a lot about sort of the differences between, again, the NDP and the Liberals on the left side, because obviously none of us, I don't think Stephen Harper is a decent candidate. In our age bracket, in our sort of socioeconomic position, I don't think anybody in our position, or at least it would be a very small minority, is actually going to vote Conservative in this election.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a fundamental difference, apparently, in the economic policies of the NDP and Liberals.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having a conversation, I forget who it was with, but talking about maybe it was actually what led to this podcast happening, talking about how the economic policies differ between the Liberals and the NDP and how that could impact me, and me not thinking that it really could impact me.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I'll start, I'll just say that economically, it's interesting to see the way the platforms have kind of fallen. It seems as though the NDP and the Liberals seem to have switched. Since the NDP became the official opposition, they've kind of tried to take the center ground away from the Liberals, and the Liberals have taken advantage of that and definitely moved to the left. One key difference is that the Liberals want to increase or add a tax bracket rather on the top end, so an income tax bracket on the top end, and they want to fund a lot of I don't know, initiatives, let's say.
I can break this down further if you want.
By using that tax. Yeah, sure.
It was my
Um,
job to know at least part of this for a while.
okay, yeah, kill it.
Um, thank you. So the taxation structure changes would be to basically add a tax bracket for those individuals making over $200,000 a year, and increasing it by, uh, honestly, it seems like a trivial amount. It's like 1% or something like that.
Hmm.
But raising that tax revenue allows you to decrease the tax burden on the middle class. And I forget exactly where the middle class starts in his definition. I think it's at around 40,000, 40 to 80, 100, something like that. No,
Yeah,
that
it's
seems
like
high. But anyway, it's in that range. And so he wants to drop their taxes, and at the same time, their other initiative was to not scrap, as the conservative ads will have you believe, but boost the universal child care benefit. And, sorry, not only boost it, but they ensure that the income gained from the universal child care benefit is no longer taxable as it was under the conservatives, which
mm,
I always found strange because they would give you a check and then say, by the way, this says it's a couple $100, but you can keep 14 at the end of the year, so make sure to ferret some of that away,
mm,
which just seems silly, I think. But I
yeah,
mean, it ensures that you have a progressive structure to it, but in a pretty roundabout way. So what the liberals would do is take what was a universal child care benefit and then make it, what do I want to say, progressive, such that you give more money to those who need it most and less money to those who don't need it as much, finishing with, I think, people making over $200,000 a year who don't really need a government handout in order to have children,
Hmm.
mm,
in my opinion.
yeah.
So that
No, well,
was,
that's pretty fair analysis, actually.
thank you. So that's that part of it. And the next was just, I'm going to quote Rick Mercer and say that their plan is to spend like drunken liberals. Their plan is to spend like Paul Martin on 3 bottles of rye.
Yeah,
They are going
yeah,
to run 3 years, $10 billion deficits each to invest in social infrastructure, green infrastructure, which has a lot to do with renewable energy, which I would like to look more into.
me too.
And sorry, another part of that is infrastructure to deal with climate change. So one of the campaign promises I was actually there to hear as it was first spoken. It's to do things like shoring up the bank of the Bow River and invest in the Green Line on the sea train. So,
Mm,
flood mitigation, increased access to public transit,
right.
et cetera, et cetera. Um, oh man, there was another one. Green infrastructure, social infrastructure like houses, social housing, old folks' homes, et cetera, that kind of stuff. And I think the final one was just infrastructure in general.
Sure.
Yeah,
And
like I think it was transit, wasn't it?
maybe, but like, I think it did come down to even things like roads, because we do have a problem in Canada with infrastructure. And the Building Canada Fund of Stephen Harper was like going to amount to a couple billion maybe. And
Mm,
that doesn't even scratch the surface of the trillions of dollars worth of problems we're going to have if we don't deal with it.
Yeah.
And honestly, Trudeau's analysis of it matches a lot of the economists I've heard. And it's probably because I read a lot of Mike Moffat, because I like Mike Moffat. And apparently he's been advising the party because they asked him to, and, he wants to see things shape up the way he thinks they should shape up. So,
mm,
but the argument being that we have a good debt to GDP ratio, and
yeah.
the argument there is like not looking at absolute debt levels, because it's like saying Bill Gates owes $100 and a 2-year-old owes $100. You'd rather Bill Gates owes you $100 because he's much more likely to pay you back than the 2-year-old,
Sure.
That's right.
just on a
That's right.
debt to GDP ratio.
Yeah.
And the other argument is that our economy is not doing terribly well, so our interest rate is tremendously low, and you will never have the low interest rate for taking out loans to deal with this, and you're not going to have the low labor costs that you do right now in the future to deal with these problems. And there was one
Yeah,
other
right.
thing. Oh,
Well, you
he also wants to make an infrastructure bank so that even
right.
municipalities can borrow money based on the prime lending rate that the government has access to,
That's
so
right.
that, I mean, you can then, I don't know why you would say to municipalities, nope, I mean, you're a government in our country, but you don't have access to those rates. I mean, you need to do this stuff so that people can do things in the city, but yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's along the same lines. The NDP has proposed essentially they've identified the same problems, but they proposed different methods of dealing with it. So to start, instead of talking about the including or opening a new tax bracket, what they want to do is maintain taxes the way they are, but in, increase taxes or close tax loopholes on large corporations because they think that they can draw more money, more revenue, government revenue, out of those large corporations who are paying very little tax right now and have plenty of money to fund kind of the social infrastructure part of the plan that Nick talked about.
Mhm.
So that includes $15 a day daycare. The reason why they're going after this daycare plan so actively is because what they think is that middle class families are often two working parents, and they think that they want to support um, this, uh, this framework by giving them affordable daycare. So essentially easing pressure off of the middle class, because right now daycare is blown out and there aren't enough spaces, right? So in the current environment, if that continues to progress, you're going to have um, the access to good jobs go down because one of the parents, if they're going to be raising children, is going to have to stay at home instead of being part of the workforce, and you're essentially limiting that kind of access to the economy, right? So I think that's their approach for that.
And I'm sorry to
In
jump in here, but there is evidence to suggest that that will work because
Yes,
government subsidized daycare has been tried in other jurisdictions, and it has worked to mobilize the women who would and it's typically women that would
it is.
otherwise not be able to engage in the workforce.
Hmm.
And it's
And what
interesting
and
because
what
that's one of those
yeah,
things where there is evidence to suggest that if you spend that money on the problem, it will pay for itself in the long run.
exactly. And it's a really neat method of raising revenue as well, because essentially what you're doing is you're spending no money to collect revenue by just closing loopholes in current legislation, and you're essentially redirecting that money that you've paid nothing for into easing a social problem. So the logic behind it is pretty good, and experience, like Nick said, in other nations, it seems to pay off. Um, the other thing they want to do is literally dump money into infrastructure in Toronto, especially because they want to ease a lot of the congestion and the lockup in Toronto. And what they want to do is use that as a framework to build other municipal infrastructure in large cities across Canada. Similarly to the Liberals, instead of investing in something like an infrastructure bank, what they want to do is work more closely with municipalities in developing plans for infrastructure and directly funding them. So it's kind of a more direct way of then in just building another institution and having municipalities apply for funding. It's actually actively working with the municipalities because apparently there's a backup of all of these plans that municipalities have put forth, and they've been sitting nowhere. Assumedly, they're sitting in the same place that all of the science that got erased from the Library of Canada is.
Well,
Um,
that actually appears to be one of the conservative strategies to balance their budget is that they had budgeted for a certain amount of money to be spent, and then they don't spend all of it, which is
That's
just
it.
so frustrating.
Yeah, exactly. Because they essentially make promises that they say, "Oh, we're going to assist with this," and then as kind of the clock ticks down, they say, "Oh, we've got all this money. Let's just put it towards you know, let's just redirect it and not do anything with it." The other thing is the NDP. Now, I don't know how I stand about this because I agree with Nick that they should take advantage of low interest rates while they're around and invest that in labor, so essentially rebuild infrastructure. But the NDP seems to be declaring that they want to have a balanced budget right away. Um, I don't really know how that's going to work out for them. The history shows that they're best placed to run a balanced budget. It would be interesting to see how that actually comes into effect, I think. There was another issue I think that you brought up, Nick, that in terms of the economy, how they wanted to what they wanted to tackle. And I can't remember. I think I might have jumped over it in assessing that list.
I wanted to
Um,
say pharmacare was their other huge push, or their main pillar.
right. I think generally speaking, there's an acknowledgement that if you look at the population curve right now, for example, it's bulging in kind of the middle age, right? So we're right now on the precipice of a population bomb. And first of all, by acknowledging it, that's a huge issue. But by building the infrastructure and taking steps to deal with that, it's going to limit the damage done to our economy because it is going to hurt. If we're not prepared, it's going to completely crush our social safety net. Um,
Mhm.
and by investing in a plan like pharmacare, investing in things like housing stipends and supplements for seniors, and dealing and helping and assisting with largely a group of populations who my parents are in this as well. I have, my on one side I have a parent who's retired and who's living on their savings, and on the other I have a parent who is not retired and who plans on working until the last possible day that she can in a job that doesn't really net her much money. So how do you ease the pressure off seniors who are approaching the age where they're being asked to retire, essentially, but they don't have the money to save to live in retirement, and essentially they're going to be going into poverty. So by acknowledging that and building a sense of it, I think the NDP has said that they're going to provide tax breaks. They're going to up Social Security payments, up retirement, or lower the retirement age again to 65, so that they can have access to their pension more quickly. Taking steps like that to address the population bomb is going to be, I think, is going to help make or break a decision maker at this point, or a person making a decision.
Hmm. I do really like the idea of a pharmacare plan because I think it's just profoundly hypocritical that our approach right now is to provide free medical care to people,
Mm.
but then in the modern industrialized society where we have pharmacare or pharmaceuticals how they are, that's the primary tool with which doctors treat disease most often. And to say that yes, we'll cover your operation, that's fine, that's good, whatever, but that thing I prescribed for you, that's on you,
Yeah.
which super sucks. And I mean, I also have a vested interest because I have asthma, and those inhalers are not cheap.
Yeah, and I mean, I spent a stint in the hospital last year, and I'm kind of placating a disease of my own. And when you realize how much money you spend on medication just to kind of like keep an even keel, I mean, it can become prohibitive, especially if diseases progress or you're faced into a situation where your medical condition has put you out of work. So you don't have any income going in, but you're still on the hook for the medication to keep you alive. Like
Mhm.
and that decision is very pressing for a lot of people who are facing older age.
Yeah.
And again, if you nationalized pharmacare and then did something like what the Swedes do, where every month they have a list of every medication they need, and then they go with the cheapest supplier for that month. They just basically have an auction. So,
Yeah.
all right, who gives us the lowest price? And then they go with that. And if you had that kind of bulk purchasing, the government would save so much money in the long run, I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. And those savings would be passed on to the people who need those meds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is probably a good place to do sort of final statements. I said at the outside of this that I wanted to decide who I was going to vote for by the end of this show,
Right.
and we're running up on 2 hours here. We're coming up to like an hour and 45 minutes. I want to put this out tomorrow, ideally, to give people a maximum amount of time to actually listen to it before
Ooh.
voting.
Okay.
So what I think we should do, unless you guys have something more pressing that you want to say before we get to this, but I think we should take 2 or 3 minutes, and if there's anything you guys want to say about politics, about the political party that you're planning on voting for, or the party that you support, and just kind of like a closing statements type of thing.
Yeah, sure. I'll just take the initiative and go first.
Please do.
I've always been quite vocal about who I support. Ever since I started voting, I voted NDP. I do this because I am hopeful that we can get back to a dialogue about discussing ideas and reform. And I voted in the advance election this time for my NDP candidate, Ellen White, because I want to put more New Democrats in Parliament. The reason why I voted for NDP this election in particular is because the biggest issue for me is democratic reform. I keep seeing this, like, as I said, kind of like a web work and a myriad of issues that seem to be inherently connected to our disproportionate lack of representation. And compared to the rest of the world, I've been living in Australia now for almost 2 years, and I've seen a system that isn't perfect, but it's far more representative, and it challenges the individual voter to become interested in the political process, understand what they're voting for, and participate more actively in the decisions that affect them, their neighbors, and the rest of their communities. I think the reason why I support the NDP above the Liberals in this particular issue, in this particular election, is that the NDP have come up with a plan. Again, it's not perfect, but it's a plan, and it's there, and you can read it, and you can see their history on voting for measures that are in support of that plan. What I've heard from the Liberal campaign is that they want to continue looking at it. We've been looking at this for a long time. There's a lot of studies that are out there comparing and contrasting the ways we can affect good democratic reform in Canada, and I'm sick of waiting. I'm sick of being in a country where the court can strip away my power to vote, even though I have citizenship, just because I'm living outside the country. It's issues that are important to me, that, like this one, that are the reason why I vote in the first place, and the reason why I do so in advance polls. If you're going to vote, vote for the issues that you care about, and support the people who are willing to stand up for those issues. Don't do it because you want somebody to leave, and don't do it because you think nobody else has a better chance. That's my argument.
Well said.
Very nicely done. So, my main issue coming into this election was science and technology, and R&D, as has been very well discussed on Future Chat. Be sure to check that out tomorrow morning. Sorry? Oh, yeah.
Episode.
And honestly, a big part of why I'm voting for who I'm voting right now is that Kent Hare took the time to sit down with me as a private citizen, and I told him, I said, these are my issues. This is what I think we're doing wrong, and this is what I think is the better way forward. Because right now, not only are we a laughingstock on the world stage, but we are also doing our country a disservice by acting in the way we are. And not only did he listen, he asked intelligent questions. He took my notes with him at the end of the meeting. And actual months later, I went to a debate where he was present, and they were asking for audience questions. And so my question was what the parties thought of the current R&D structure and what they would like to see done differently. And Kent answered in the way that I thought he should answer, in that we should view R&D spending as an investment rather than a cost, and a way to keep Canada competitive on the world stage going forward, like in the decades to come, not just the next fiscal quarter. And that's a big part of why I'm voting for Ken Hare. Why I would advocate for the Liberals on the national stage is that since the Great Recession, I've watched my country stagnate. I've watched it just peter along with minimal growth, almost entirely propped up by Albertan oil. Like, that was a big part of why our dollar lasted as long as it did.
Mm-hmm.
And I watch young people around me struggle to find stable employment. Me and Rob.
Yep.
Hey, I'm part of that too, even though I left. It took me a long time.
I watched, like, I'm watching a lot of layoffs right now because of the oil crunch, but I've been watching people worry about their jobs for like a decade now, and I'm tired of it. And I feel like the only party who has really, truly looked at this situation and said, no, we need to put our foot down on this issue, we need to take action, and we need to stimulate the economy properly by investing in infrastructure, not by putting out a large-scale ad campaign to tell people how great we are and how great our economic action plan is, but by actually taking action on these things and actually investing on infrastructure. And the whole reason you invest in infrastructure, as Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, the original advocate, said, even if you don't stimulate the economy, worst case scenario, if you invest in infrastructure, is you're left with that infrastructure that you needed the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I would advocate for the Liberals on a national stage. That's honestly the bulk of it, because I think that's going to stimulate the economy and that's going to get us to more of a place where we need to be. But honestly, I genuinely feel that the NDP and the Liberals have more in common than they have differences.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, Rob, what I want you to do, is go to 308.com or Vote Together or some organization like that, and I want you to see the ABC candidate, the anything but conservative candidate, and I want you to vote for them.
So this whole thing has all been Nick trying to get me to strategic vote.
It sounds like it.
Because regardless who we strategically vote for, it should be the last election in which you have to do that.
It should be. And so my position after all of this, after both of your very passionate and completely non-argumentative statements.
Rob's voting green.
Yeah, which I applaud you for. No, I don't think I would vote green in this election. I would love to vote green in the future.
Yeah, me too.
I really want to vote independent. I really do.
I want to vote for both. You both made very compelling points, and I don't disagree with either of those collections of statements. I think that the NDP, I have a lot in common with them. As the Vote Compass showed, I think I have a lot in common with Liberals. And I think that's a lot of people in my position who aren't super informed on matters, and who just, again, who science and tech innovation, that kind of thing, is very important to them. And sort of coming up in the economy is going to prove to be important in the future, or in the next maybe 5 or 10 years. I think we're all kind of being forced to make that decision, and like you guys said, they're not that different. They're more similar than they're different, and I would love to be able to cast half a vote for either of them.
Yeah, I know, right?
Or rank them on a ballot.
Or rank them.
Or
Yeah,
rank
a
them.
ranked ballot. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like where Nick is going, and I honestly have thought of that. I feel like, once again, my single vote isn't going to matter on the national stage. I've always felt that way. I'm going to vote because it's super important. But I really think that I would like to redo this election almost immediately, with Stephen Harper no longer running for his seat, no longer running for the leader of the Conservative Party. I think that would make my decision a lot easier, and I can't even really think about what my decision would be in a real sort of non-strategic voting election unless it were to actually happen. Like, I can't. There's no reason to run through that scenario right now, because it's just not. That's not what I'm dealing with.
Right.
So I think I have failed in that I still don't know who I'm going to vote for.
This was all for nothing.
But the point is the point is that
Electronic high five, Matt.
Yeah.
Right
High
up there.
five.
I
Right
want
up
to vote
there.
for both, and that's the problem. It's that both options are good for me. I don't think there's a bad choice. I like the idea, the Liberals' idea, and again, so most of what I'm getting isn't from the mouths of the politicians, but it's how the media puts it. And other than the right-leaning publications that I've been reading about endorsing the Conservative government, all I've been seeing is, knowing that I lean pretty far to the left politically, I think the Liberals are going to end up being a better choice overall.
Yes.
But I love the little guy factor of the NDP. So I'm so torn. I'm so torn.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't always the little guy in this election, Rob.
I know.
They were projecting for a majority before
Yeah.
Quebec decided they were a bunch of racists. And again, sarcasm.
Yeah.
But the
you know
kneecap
what?
debate has caused a massive swing in the Quebec electorate.
You could say it kneecaps the whole bloody thing.
I should say it kneecaps.
It kneecaps the whole bloody thing.
All right. Well, unless you guys have something else to say, I think that's probably a good place to end it for now.
Come for the policy, stay for the puns.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
So what I'll say, first of all, Matt, thank you very much for coming from across the world to us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
It was really great having you. Very
Yeah,
informative.
I hope we get the opportunity to do this more often.
I hope so as well.
Cool.
Nick, once again, it's always great having you here for a couple hours every once in a while.
Yeah, I love seeing you once every so often.
So I will direct people to obviously first go and vote. And if this election's already passed by the time you listen to this, go and vote in the next election you're asked to vote in. This is not going to be an evergreen episode, although I think people would still enjoy it or get something out of it after the 19th.
At the very least, just take the vote compass quiz and see how the parties align with what you think.
Yeah.
No party is going to align perfectly with everything you believe, but you can at least get an idea for who you might want to vote for.
Yeah. Okay, that's it for the show. head to unwindmedia.com/EMW for East Meets West if you want to listen to old episodes and future episodes, and you can subscribe from there as well. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being here, Matt and Nick, once again.
Take care, Rob. Take
Have
care,
fun,
Nick.
guys.
It's good to see you too.
You too, man.